Gigs. 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 Gigs, 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 gigs. What are they? How do you explore them as a performer? And important things for you to know to navigate those gigs, regardless of the type that you are working. Hello everybody, welcome to my channel. My name is Cherry Cheeks and this is Cheeky Burlesque. For anybody who's new to burlesque, whether you've watched burlesque live or if you're just dipping your toes in, maybe you're starting to get your own gigs for the very first time, it can be a lot. I'm not gonna act like it's the easiest thing to navigate. Burlesque is very much at this stage in this world of neo-burlesque. We don't necessarily have industry standards across the board, despite many people advocating for them to exist. And even knowing the different types of gigs that you can get. I'm going to break this down as best as I can to help support people who might be new or even exploring different types of shows that you might not have been part of yet. Grab your notebooks, have an open mind, and let's dive in. I'm going to say some pretty general language. In reality, any one of these types of productions, there can be overlap. You will probably see in reality quite a big mix of how a producer chooses to operate their own shows and how they work with people. Don't take everything I say as the truth or the facts, because I'm just going to speak mainly to how I like to categorize these different types of shows myself, and specifically from a performer perspective with navigating it and a little bit more of behind the scenes. Use this information for your own knowledge, but also be adaptable to the process with whoever you tend to be working with. I'm going to be breaking it down basically to two main types of gigs that you can get: application-based and invitation. And within those, they're going to look very different with how they operate, how you're going to navigate them. First of all, application-based shows. These are the roots and the foundation of most of our shows and industries. These are the ones that we tend to expect. These are more often than not the community-based shows, by community, for community, still trying to reach out to the public audience and get mainstream, but they are very centered around burlesque performers creating burlesque for burlesque to thrive in the mainstream. These can look like things like newbie shows, variety and cabaret style shows, stage shows, floor shows or roaming shows, and also last is festivals. So for myself, these shows tend to be the ones that I give kind of the bigger picture of burlesque and what we tend to see of burlesque as an industry. These shows are the ones that you tend to have to apply to, whether that's formally or informally. So they might happen weekly, monthly, even quarterly. These are mostly kind of the staples of burlesque gigs as a performer. So this can look like producers having a set time period for applications to be open. You might have more casual casting calls from certain producers where they might go on social media or Facebook to say, hey, we're looking for performers for the show. Send me an email or respond to this post if you're interested. Those ones are a lot less common, but you do see them quite often. Especially I feel like nowadays, post-pandemic, I find those much more common myself personally. And some producers are gonna have more of a critical lens with their shows and how they produce them. Some producers will want to see very specifically a video to say, what is this exact act that's gonna be on my stage? And some producers are gonna be very much more casual, more trusting, and just giving space for performers to experiment, to get the experience to get on stage and practice and learn. So every producer is gonna be different. So you'll probably learn as you go and as you work with more and more producers what each person is going to be looking for. I think that's kind of, for me, at least something that's experimental and you learn through experience. But I'll try again to kind of navigate as best as I can. So how do you get these shows? How do you get your name out there? Whether you debuted yesterday and are brand new looking for your first gig, or if you've been doing burlesque for a bit and wanting to get your name in these shows, fill out those applications. Send those emails to producers or comment on those posts. That is the main way you can get those gigs. That is just the very basics. Talk to producers and don't be afraid to network and really build those relationships. The more we tend to see people, the more we get to talk to you and remember your face or get to know you as a person a little bit more, how you might operate behind the scenes a little bit. That can be extremely helpful. Diving into these different types of shows, what do they look like? Starting off with cabaret and variety. These are kind of what people tend to imagine of burlesque today. They tend to be smaller community shows, maybe 12 to 15 performers. A lot of the time there's going to be your audience sitting like theater kind of style, or maybe it's tables for a venue. They tend to have a mix of performance styles, whether that is burlesque and drag and comedy and dance or whatever else, music. And they also tend to have a very typical style that you probably see of MC, performer, MC, performer. I would say they are the bread and butter to burlesque. They're going to be the ones that you tend to see themes sometimes. More often than not, you tend to see them be very open, and it's more of a everything goes, any theme. But these are the ones that you tend to see the most of. Next up is stage shows. The way I kind of look at it is these shows mean you have a stage. You are guaranteed to have a stage, whether that is a big stage like the Burlesque Hall of Fame or a much smaller stage at, say, a pub. But you do have a stage that's a very clear stage that may or may not be raised, but is separate from the audience. I like to think of these shows as the ones where if you have props, if you have a big set, if you have a big costume, these are the ones that I tend to think of more often fitting those acts. You might not go into the audience as much if the stage is very hard to get off of or onto. And with theater shows, I also say it really depends on the producer, but I tend to see a lot more producers be more curated with theater shows, and they might have a specific skill level that they want performers to be. There's always going to be producers who have bias, who are still going to cast very specific performers or performers that they only know, who are their own friends. Burlesque isn't perfect. Drag isn't perfect. No art form is perfect. Every art form has its own pieces to navigate and its own biases and its own things that people advocate against and for, and trying to push for progress or trying to stick to tradition. So just like any art form, you're going to see that with burlesque. With theater, those are the shows I tend to think of being a little bit next level if you're brand new. Floor shows and roaming shows. These are the in-your-face shows. These are audience mingling, audience centered. They can still have any style of burlesque, but these are the ones where you are in the audience. This could be anything like at a pub, a restaurant. I've seen some of these shows at breweries, at museums. You may or may not have a stage, but generally, even if there is a stage, it's really, really easy for you to get off of it. So it might just be maybe a foot high, but it's easy for you to get off and go into the audience. Being able to immerse the audience into that performance and be part of that performance with the performer. So because of that, these shows tend to have a lot more dynamics such as tipping, where you might not see tipping in the other types. These shows also tend to see a lot more improv, maybe more flexibility with an act where a performer might have the same costume, same reveal that they do normally, but how they do it or how they fit it into that venue will look very different. Personally, when I do these shows, I like to be very conscious of what does the space look like? What are some barriers for me, or what are some things that can be used in my advantage? For example, if there are pillars in the middle of the room, then that means there's going to be things like blocked sight lines. I'm going to have to be very conscious of how I do reveals if I want the most people in the audience to see me. On the flip side, sometimes I find poles and those kinds of walls being very, very fun to use as a prop as I do my act, or to really integrate with it to help me with a reveal or move. I really like floor shows because of both of those elements, with the flexibility and the improv and the audience interaction. That's going to be up to you and what you're looking for. And the last one I'm going to speak about is the highly admired, highly goal specific for a lot of performers, and also highly controversial burlesque festivals. Burlesque festivals are big. They are an international scale festival. Even if it's a country focused on their own country's performers, it's still national. And for burlesque festivals, the goal is often to bring people from across the globe, or across North America, or across Canada, or wherever the focus is of that particular festival. The goal is to bring performers together to really showcase what's out there to their local scene and the local audience, and also introduce their local scene and their local audience to the bigger scene. But it's really this cross-mingling and cross-sharing of energy, styles, professionalism backstage. Typically, they are multiple days with different performers on each night. They quite often have workshops. They might have other things like an education series, minglers, or after parties. It's usually a minimum of 3 days. These are the larger scale events. Some performers love them, and some performers just feel they're not for them, and that is okay. And one thing that is unique to festivals as a standard, generally for festivals, they are the one that you can expect to apply, and more often than not, you often have to pay to apply. Festivals are very much the performer expenses. So as a performer, it's your responsibility to cover things like your own travel and your own accommodations, your own food, sightseeing. Generally, everything is at your expense, which is why festivals are not the most accessible for everybody, especially financially. And when you apply, I actually have a full video here talking about burlesque festivals and applying to them. They are the gig that is going to be much more particular typically with how they hire performers and how to get accepted to them. This is going to have a more thorough process. Some festivals have just the producer looking at the applications. Some actually have a panel. Festivals tend to have a much more critical lens of how people get on those stages and what kinds of acts and what kind of caliber gets accepted. But I do have a video dedicated just to festivals, and not just a video. I have a full playlist. I really highly recommend you check it out if you want to get in the festival circuit and start applying and know what they are and know how to get accepted and what festivals are looking for. Go check that out. So I did it! Woohoo! That is all of the application-based shows. With that, I'm gonna now go into more of the invitation shows. These are shows that I typically categorize as there's not often applications. There might be, but more often than not, these are producers who I tend to see reaching out to very specific performers, whether or not it's a producer from the burlesque world or someone completely unassociated. These are the ones where you tend to get inquiries. So first of all are troupes. A troupe is a group of performers with similar like-minded styles often. Sometimes it's just a goal and a mission. They have very curated shows around that concept. When I talk about troupes, I'm saying troupes and collectives, so those are kind of similar. The thing with troupes and collectives, you tend to see the same people being called like a member of the group. You tend to see the same performers on stage performing. You know who to expect performing in those shows because they're a member of that collective or that troupe. For the most part, everybody who's in that troupe or that collective is putting equal work into those productions and putting in the same amount of risk. It might look like everyone in that group putting in some money to help produce the show and get return in the ticket sales. It might look like splitting up tasks. So one person is dedicated to the coordination with the venue, one person might be dedicated to the promotions, one might be dedicated to keeping the performers together and getting the show notes ready. Every troupe and every group is going to be very different with how they operate, but that's generally how I think of it, is equal work, equal risk, equal recognition. There are so many troupes across the world, and you know what to expect going into those shows. And sometimes troupes accept a guest performer in those shows, and sometimes it's just only their collective members. And usually in that case, if there are guests, more often than not, it's gonna be someone who aligns with their styles of show. So if it's a troupe that does classic burlesque, they might invite people who also do classic burlesque. Someone who does a high Nordlesque show will probably be inviting other Nordlesque performers to be those guests. Sometimes they do applications, sometimes they do very specific outreach to people they may know already who fits that theme. So that is basically what to expect from them. And how do you get those gigs? If you are one of those people interested, make those connections, get to know what they're looking for, watch those shows. Sometimes troupes have auditions, sometimes they don't. If you want to be part of a troupe, show them that you're interested. It really doesn't hurt to ask, do they ever bring on new troupe members? And if they do, what does that process look like? And when you're asking what that process looks like, it's also important to ask, what does it look like to be a part of that troupe on a day-to-day basis? And see if that's really a lifestyle that fits within your lifestyle. So some things for you to consider. On a similar note, there are also restaurant rosters or venue rosters. These are shows that I tend to see, again, in restaurants, pubs. More often than not, these are typically weekly, maybe monthly shows at the same venue where I see those contracts existing. They might have a dedicated time slot that that performer performs twice a week, every other week. If I'm an audience member who goes to those shows regularly, I can probably see the same names over and over again. To me, those are usually the ones that I see paying the bills. And when I say that, I mean consistently. That is a sustainable position. That is a contract that you know to expect on a regular basis. Those are the ones that might be more industry focused, and you might have to really align yourself to, again, attend those shows, introduce yourself to the booking agent or the venue manager or whoever's responsible for managing that roster if you want to be a part of those shows. Every venue, every roster is going to be different and operate differently. I really recommend that you learn what they're looking for. And again, what does that process look like? What does payment scales look like? How can you get your name as part of that roster? And then we have the really different, unique gigs that is different every single time and you don't always know what to expect. These are private gigs and special event gigs. These often are from people who are outside of the burlesque community who want to bring you in to their home. These are people who are probably reaching out to you. You probably have your name out there a little bit more, so these might be ones that you have to really build your reputation if you want to be a part of these shows. Private gig can look like anything like a birthday, holiday shows, staff events. People are specifically reaching out to me as Cherry Cheeks to be a part of this event. These are ones that I personally make my higher rate shows. I typically tend to charge 2 to 3 times my usual rate, and often, not always, but often they are from bigger businesses. Definitely not always. People are still stingy with their budgets, but make sure as a performer, if you are getting these events, that you make them know your value and also the value of burlesque. The company may be reaching out to you specifically, or sometimes those companies hire a burlesque performer in the community to kind of be the mediator to curate a show for them on their behalf. I've done this before. I've worked with our local museum before to bring performers there for a Valentine's Day event a number of years ago. And at that time, I coordinated with them a budget of how much money it would cost to bring in 5 performers, and also what I would need and what we would need as a group to be part of this event. And also made sure that I knew what were the expectations between myself and the event coordinator. That particular event myself, I reached out to them because I saw them do a private event probably like 3 months before that, and then Valentine's Day was coming up and they had a Valentine's Day version of that same public event that I was like, I wonder if they were burlesque. And it worked. Industry, think business if you want these kinds of gigs. Think about that networking aspect and professionalism and writing those emails and getting your name out there. That is how I usually recommend people get those gigs. Those are just a couple of different ways if you want to do those bigger kind of more private, more unique kind of events. The very last event or type of gig I'm going to talk about, what I like to call curated theater shows. This is different than other theater shows. When I'm talking about curated theater shows, these are very, very specific higher end shows. I like to think of things like reimagining of specific movies, and also it can be original works that is written by the producer or written by the group who's performing in it. This may require more dedication from you, both in time commitment. Maybe you're going to be part of the planning or the writing. Maybe there's rehearsals. It might be diverse where some people have more commitment than others or time needs. So some examples that I've seen in my lifetime: Cherry on Top produced Roulette a number of years ago, which was a reimagining of The Little Mermaid with burlesque performers and drag and aerial silks and circus elements and so many other different pieces. Calgary Cabaret often does a Clue event. The Geekenders in Vancouver often do Nordesque themed shows, such as with The Simpsons. They've done Into the Spider-Verse. They've done Star Wars. Rice Cake Events in Vancouver recently did a K-pop Demon Hunters with an all-Asian and Korean cast. And there's also many producers in general who tend to do reimaginings of concepts like The Green Fairy and Absinthe, or flipping Disney on its head. Those are, like, in my mind, the reimaginings of things that already exist. And then there's a lot of people people who do the original works, their own script, their own process of how they want to tell those stories. Maybe it's a little bit more experimental. Because of the level of those shows and the dedication, those producers might have formal auditions, or they might want to have a formal application process, or maybe they'll specifically reach out to performers who they know fit within those themes. They have seen have that work ethic that they want for those shows. I personally have not worked with those shows. I do see a lot of the people who do work with those shows tend to have really strong relationships with those producers, or those producers have seen those performers in community, how they work, what do they look like behind the scenes, what is their skill level as a performer, does it fit within their vision. I would focus on relationship. I would recommend showing your interest and say, hey, I see you have the show coming up. Is there a space? What are you looking for? Is there any way I could be part of it? Or is there anything I could support with? Maybe it's already cast, but at least like behind the scenes helping out, so that for the next show there might be opportunities for you. Those are, for me, some of the general themes, general styles of burlesque and gigs that as a performer you can apply to, how to kind of get your name out there. Before I wrap up, I'm going to give you some very key things to know. I do have a video that is talking all about what to know upon hire, so this is going to be a summary of some of those. I really recommend you go check out that video. But generally for any gig, I always recommend, is there going to be a green room? And if not, what is it going to look like, so you can know to plan or accept or not accept. What is the expected pay? When and how are you going to be paid? Does the venue have licensing for burlesque? Will there be a stage kitten, or are you expected to pick up your own clothes? And does the audience know burlesque already, or is this going to be a newer audience seeing burlesque for the first time? What is the producers and the venue's plans for safety and accessibility as well? Those are some of the key things I really look for. I really recommend you check out my other video to go more in depth with that. I really hope this video helped. I know I talked a lot about a lot of different things. There's a lot of different types of gigs. Really recommend you go explore, build those relationships, get to know the producers in your area, get to know producers outside of your area, and really don't be afraid to get your name out there. I know it can be really scary sometimes, especially if you're brand new or just starting out, or even if you're trying something for the first time. Everyone has been there before. I still get there sometimes where I still feel brand new and I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm gonna figure it out. The first step is always just sending that email or saying hello to somebody. And sometimes there are those elements of like social anxiety. You never know until you try. And it's up to you to decide what you will and will not accept. And sometimes you'll feel like a show's not for you because you just don't want it to be, or you don't want to be a part of it. And that is also okay. There are always going to be other gigs, there's always going to be other shows, and I really hope that at least this video helped give you a very broad overview of the landscape. And I've talked a little bit about some of those nuances also in other videos. If you like this video, if you found it helpful, please hit that subscribe button, follow me, leave a comment down below. Did I miss anything? Is there any gigs that you think I should have talked about that you think should have been included? Do you even have advice for other performers and how to navigate these different types of gigs and landscape? But with that, my name's Cherry Cheeks, this has been Cheeky Burlesque, and I will see you next time. Bye!